Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Plant Consciousness Commentary. Wow, that sounded really scripted. I'm still trying to figure out how exactly I'm going to start this. I have been doing this plant consciousness commentary for over a year now. And I think because I started it inside of the naturally conscious community. And so in there, obviously, there's a lot more connections. And I don't know, I just have never really developed this direct way of starting things. I guess I might need your help on that. I have no introduction. I have no introductory music. I have no nothing. Kind of figured it out for the podcast, but for this commentary, it's not. And plus, today is a very odd day. I have spent most of my morning helping a friend out at IKEA, of all places, trying to help him get a bunch of furniture and dismantling and it's just been a crazy morning. So, and it's a weird day. Like it's gray out. It looks like it's going to rain. It was cold this morning. I still can't believe it's July. And it's very humid, like so humid that it feels wet inside of, my own home. So it's just a very bizarre thing. But I'm super happy to be here because this is my favorite place to be on Fridays. This is the place where I get to read very unusual papers. And today's paper is without a doubt on the list of like the kinds of things that only academics can get away with, in the sense that if you were to try to do, you either have to be extremely creative art type, which I think is awesome, or a super academic-y type in order to pull off what we're going to talk about, and you're going to see. So as you know, I go through every week here the latest, not even the latest, I go through papers and studies and articles and opinion pieces all around plant neurobiology, plant intelligence, all the critical plant studies that are related to it. And the critical plant studies actually is really expanding. There's so many things that this touch. And I try to be honest, kind of select from as wide a breadth as possible, because I think that that's more interesting for the things that we're trying to do, right? We're not all academics here. We're not all people that are specifically only studying plants from the perspective of, some kind of thesis for a PhD or something like that. We are all people that are very interested in how plants think and what are plants experiencing. And more importantly from that is from the relationships that we're building with plants, what is it about humanity that changes, and specifically about humanity and culture, right? How is it that ourselves as plant anthropologists start to make changes to create a more united world, right? So I'm trying to pick from a really broad spectrum. And so today, when I was looking for papers, mind you, I actually went through and was organizing my papers because there's so many of them, right? Where when I started in choosing papers from about 2006, there was only a few of them, and they were really, really, really specific to the discussion on plant consciousness or plant cognition and those types of papers. Today, there's this plethora of papers that talks about everything from vegetalized performance to ecofeminism to critical plant studies of all series, vegetal curation, society, and the vegetal world, and all different aspects. Plus, there's all the really technical ones. So the really technical, from the perspective of really biological ones, that talk about all the different mechanisms that we're discovering about how plants see and feel and experience the world around them. So I'm trying to pick a really broad range. And of course, your feedback is instrumental in this. Anytime that you send me a paper or some kind of article that comes out that you want me to review and you want me to talk about, that obviously makes it very high on the list because it helps me better organize them. So I had a few older papers. I have to admit, I have some older papers that are queued up, and I still have one that I was going to do today that was all about plants as electromagnetic plastic interfaces. Okay, so it's a kind of interesting biophysics and molecular biology paper. But then this other one caught my eye, and I just couldn't resist. I couldn't resist sharing this paper for you. But before I get into the paper itself, I want to share with you, just hold on, let me get to it. So you have to see this. This is I think it's a journal that came out that it's from 2017, right? And I can't figure out if it's a book or a journal because it's not super clear, but just the name of it, Meat Culture, edited by Annie Potts, just caught my attention right away. And there's a few different papers in here, like different. So I think it's more of a journal type of aspect. So what is meat culture and rotten to the bone, the discourses of contamination and such. So there's several things here um, around mainly animal culture and different aspects of meat culture. But there is one paper in here that caught my attention, which is Critical Ecofeminism, Interrogating Meat, Species, and Plants by Greta Gaard. And that was it. That was it. That caught my attention. And that's what we're going to be doing today. So we are going to be doing, this is chapter 14 from this book, all about meat culture, ecofeminism, interrogating meat, species, and plants. So this is the one we're going to go through. And hold on, I want to go into read mode. Yeah, because that gives it to us a little bit nicer. Okay, awesome. So I couldn't help it. So I'll be honest, I don't really talk very often about anything relating to, so I talk a lot about food and plants, especially in Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom, right? My seminal course, we do talk about food. We talk about the perspective of plants as food and what happens as we start to recognize our own inner plantness, as well as the sentience and the true intelligence of plants. What is it that changes in the way that we think about food? So food is a big aspect of this. What I don't get into very much is the discussion and the argument around the whole perspective of veganism and animal and all of those types of perspectives. Because as a Damanhurian, especially, my concept of it is very omnivorous, right? I really do believe that there's a combination of a relationship with other species that involves life and death. As you know, in Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom, there's an entire module dedicated to food, but there's also an entire module dedicated to life and death. And the reason for this is because in order for us to really understand the full cycle of life, we need to get out of a bit some of our human perspectives of the way that we look at life and death with these absolutes and look at them in many, many different ways with a better and a broader understanding of what it means to live and die and to be reborn and many different aspects of that, right? So in that conversation, of course, that changes the way that we look at the idea of our food, right? Because our food is a much, what's the word I'm looking for? I keep wanting to say broader because that's just the way that it keeps coming to me. But the perspective of our food is more than just about me. It's about relationships. It's about sacrifice. It's about nourishment across many different aspects, right? And so I don't really get into the perspective of it because I feel like it's still a very polarizing kind of subject. Some people feel very adamant about the way that they see the relationship with food and that this is the way that it's supposed to be. So I was excited about this paper because it's looking at it from a different perspective, at least from the little that I've been able to read. As you know, I don't go through these papers beforehand. I prefer to go through them with you so that way you can see and we can comment on them together and really see things from that perspective. Like it just is much more interesting when we get to see full reactions at the same time. Okay, so this paper. Let me get it up there again. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, so like I said, critical ecofeminism. So just already the title excites me because it's like, what does ecofeminism have to do with meat, species, and plants? I mean, and I already find it interesting that it's like meat and plant, because when we think about animals, we think about animals as alive and meat as in what we eat. But when we talk about plants, we just use the word plant, right? Plant-based food, plant power relating to food and all these different aspects, which I find interesting that we have not differentiated a plant as a living being from, yeah, sure, sometimes we use vegetals, right? Like vegetables, and vegetables are like what we think about somewhat, but that's not even true because when I think about plant proteins and all these different aspects, I just use the word plant. So already there is a a disparate way. There's already a difference in the way that we even approach the topic, where we have these different categories for animals and we don't have for plants. I still don't know if that's good or bad, to be honest. I feel like there could be aspects of it that could be good, but there could be aspects of it that are not, because we forget then that meat are animals. And at the same time, we're trying to move people to recognize plants as beings that they fully are. And so therefore, maybe it is better the fact that as food, we still use the word plant. I don't know. I'm super curious as to what you think about this. So feel free to leave a comment and see what it is that you're experiencing that. All right, let's get into this. Greta Gaard. I know nothing about who Greta Gaard is, to be honest. Sometimes I'm a little sad when some of these types of chapters and papers do not give who the person is. It might be at the very end. Let's hope it is. All right, so the quote is, "Do we need a plant ethics that responds to vegetal instrumentalization in an allied manner to the way animal ethics has responded to the animal industrial complex?" And this is from Jody Adamson and Kate Sandilands. Kate Sandilands. I have done commentary on a really in-depth interview of her on ecofeminism topics, which was really interesting, especially if you don't know anything about it. It's pretty easy to understand. And we did get into a big discussion on another paper, which was, I think, the Plant Initiative's report, yearly report that I also commented in, which is, should the Plant Initiative's perspective. So Plant Initiative is a cooperative of people who are, of mainly academics, who are looking into the perspective of, plant advocacy, right? Plant intelligence and all these different aspects. So the idea of how to be a really good advocate for plants in many different fields, and all of the critical plant studies and the plant humanities and such and such. And one of the discussion points is, should we be looking from a plant movement, from a movement of plant advocacy, should we be looking more at the animal movement and all that animals have experience, all that movement has experienced, to recognize the sentience and the intelligence of animals, and therefore relating to food and all these types of things the same way? Should we be looking for models there that we should apply for plants? And the truth of the matter is that the answer isn't necessarily the same. I mean, I don't know if it's not the same. It's not that it's not the same. It's just the fact that it's not feasible for us to think about not eating plants. In my opinion, it's also not feasible for us to think about not eating animals. That's just the way that I believe. I'm an omnivorous person. I believe that there's a lot about balance and respect and relationship and so many different aspects. And we can get into that in another day. But what's most important is that we need to look at sustenance. We are animals ourselves on this planet, and therefore we're part of the greater cycle of life. So it really is about relationships. And a lot of the animal rights conversations have tended to be, one part of it is about quality and conditions. And I think that is a piece of it that we could definitely take, right? How are we taking care of plants? How are we raising plants? How much are we allowing plants to be free plants, right? Like free range chicken, right? How much are we allowing our plant to actually be the plant that the plant is before we actually consume, versus the idea of the extreme of don't eat plants, right? We love, some of us would love to be not vegetarians, breatharians, or, to photosynthesize. Maybe we can activate our green DNA and get our own photosynthesis. But until that day happens, right? Until we're able to do that, then I think we need to figure out a different model. So just oops. Oh, I missed. I did. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I clicked the wrong button and I almost lost what we were doing. Okay, so let's get into this, because this one's got some meat to it. The above question might alert animal studies scholars to a pending omnivore backlash against a decades-long success of animal studies launched by Jacques Derrida's The Animal That Therefore I Am, which catapulted vegan perspectives into academic credibility. Like animal studies, plant studies scholarship has been ongoing for some time, but only recently has emerged as a cutting-edge academic field. One could compare Peter Singer's Animal Liberation with Peter Tompkins and Christopher Bird's The Secret Life of Plants, two that I haven't actually covered here, I have to admit. The Secret Life of Plants just touches so many different things. I actually have bookmarked a paper that is connected to the secret life of plants. And I'll get to it. It's in the list. As foundational works for two movements that would later become recognized as companion branches of post-humanist thought, though in thankless academic fashion. The founders of each branch have been strongly critiqued. Singer for his human rights-based moral extensionism, and Tompkins and Birds for their new age unscientific speculations. Oh, that was so sad. Mm. Invoking the field of critical plant studies and author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, the carnivorous locavore Michael Pollan, Adamson, and Sandilands anticipate my comparison in their description of a vegetal ecocriticism pre-conference seminar for the Association of the Study of Literature and Environment for the 2013 biannual conference. As critical animal studies and animal rights scholars activists have effectively worried constitutive, my goodness, it's gonna be one of those Fridays, boundaries between human beings and other animals, plants, studies. Excuse me, I'm going to restart that sentence because there's commas in there that I'm not. As critical animal studies and animal rights scholars / activists have effectively worried constitutive boundaries between human beings and other animals, plant studies scholars have questioned the similarly political line between plants and animals. Plants communicate, move, decide, transform, and transgress in ways that are sometimes uncomfortably like animals, including humans, and sometimes so completely other to animality that conventional metaphysical principles are radically denaturalized. And I think that this is the inherent difficulty in all of this, right? Plants have some likeness to the way animals are from the big macro categories, right? Plants can see, can hear, can smell, can taste, can have memory, can make decisions, can do all these different aspects. And those, of course, are similar to what all animals do. On the other hand, how they do these things is so outside of the norm that we expect that it's sometimes hard for us to be able to accept that kin are doing it. Because when I have a category, I have a way that I look at these types of things, of course, it is difficult to me to understand and accept that somebody who's doing it in a way that's completely different is still obtaining the same result. And because we have no feedback mechanism that is recognizable to humans, that is easily recognizable, let me say it in that way, around what the plant thought process is, right? I can look at an animal's behavior and I can somewhat interpret some of the behavioral components in the way that I see myself, right? Or that I see, and so therefore I can think, oh, okay, well, if an animal is doing this, then that must mean that they are, that they're thinking something similar to myself, whether that's embarrassment or whether that's excitement or whether that's, fear or any of these, right? If I cower and I can think of that as being fearful if I do this or that. But what can I do with plants when plants have a completely different mechanism? Do they feel fear? We don't know. Not in the way that we think we humans do it, but maybe they do. We can't get into the vegetal mind as easily as we can to the human mind, and therefore to the animal mind. And that's why we struggle so much at recognizing it. The phase similarly political line between plants and animals might raise eyebrows among animal studies scholars, and understandably so. Vegan and vegetarian feminist eco-criticism has a substantial history, starting with Carol Adams' discussion of Frankenstein's vegetarian monster in The Sexual Politics of Meat. Now, sometimes, telling you these topics, why is it that the meat people have these amazing titles? They're so interesting, so interesting. And continuing through the work of many vegan and vegetarian feminist eco-critics. But Simon Astock's essay in the flagship journal of the Association of the Study of Literature and Environment finally threw down the gauntlet, defining ecophobia as an irrational and groundless hatred of the natural world. Estock argued that ecophobia is rooted in and dependent on anthropocentric arrogance and speciesism. Thus, it is difficult to take seriously the eco critic who theorizes brilliantly on a stomach full of roast beef on rye. 4 years after placing carnivorous eco-critics under such scrutiny, the emergence of Randy Leist's Plants and Literature, Essays in Critical Plant Studies, confirms that vegan vegetarian eco-critics will soon need a response to vegetal eco-criticism, just as animal studies scholars will have to consider the findings and claims of plant studies. So, what is plant studies? And do its claims of animal-plant similarity seek to delegitimate the very real suffering of other animal species? See, here's that question, right? Because plants experience things differently, does the fact that we try to put them into the same level of political scrutiny as we do animals actually pull animals down? I swear that inside of this, without even recognizing it, Aristotle's Scala Naturae, where that puts animals above plants, is creeping in here somewhere. I am convinced that the people don't even realize how much they are being affected by it. And place human food choices on a terrain of moral relativism suitable to a carnist culture. Ooh, carnist. So let's footnote number one. We don't get really good footnotes usually. Melanie Joy uses carnism to describe cultures that make meat eating seem normal, natural, and necessary, effectively hegemonic, though a conceptual schema that uses objectification, de-individualization, and dichotomization. Joy's work popularizes concepts from more sophisticated philosophical arguments, such as Val Plumwood's master model and the wealth of groundwork provided by vegan and vegetarian scholar activists. So it's okay to think about plants in that way, but not animals in that way. I don't know if I picked the right paper because this one might just piss me off, to be honest. Central to these questions are the key terms meat and species. Plant studies, a new field emerges. Although articles formulating the emergence of plant studies have already begun to appear in journals such as Quanta, Mother Earth News, Journal of the Fantastic in the Arts, Societies, and even Journal for Critical Animal Studies, plant studies emerged into popular culture through the publication of Michael Pollan's 2013 The Intelligent Plant article. Really? That's when you think that that's what made it emerge? Interesting. We did go through that this article, by the way, in detail. So you can also go back through our old postings. Previous plant consciousness commentary. I think back then I was calling it plant intelligence commentary, which is, one and the same. But about the intelligent plants, the New Yorker article. It's definitely worth a read and definitely understanding where Michael Pollan was coming from. There, Pollan reports the findings of biologists, molecular, cell, and plant, confirming capacities that new materialists call agency, and suggesting paradigm-shifting parallels to animal capacities as well. So here's an interesting little table. I'm not going to go through it in detail because I think but it is interesting, right? The fact that we know that we as humans and as animals in general, we really only recognize 5 main senses, right? Smell, taste, touch, and sound. But when it comes to plants, we have all of these same 5, and then we recognize at least another 15 to 20 more of them, right? So mostly we recognize about another 15. Again, in Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom, I detail out a bunch of these because I think that they are very interesting for us to understand. Plants also communicate. We've gone through so many different papers to talk about this. Plants are intelligent. What does intelligence really mean? The whole self-identification perspective is another really interesting piece of this, which is that we recognize self-awareness as individuals and families and species in animals, mainly through the sense of sight and of recognition through that. But there are other mechanisms that have been recognized in plants to understand that plants really know who are their their family members, who kin specifically are, and then, all of their territory and the land that there's in. So this self-identification, which is a big piece of recognizing consciousness, that burden has been met. There are still human neurobiologists, let me be clear, that do not necessarily want to accept that, but it doesn't mean that it's not happening. I mean, it really is. And then arguments for uniqueness and hence moral standing, which is a big discussion topic that's happening. There are legal rights and there are moral rights. And I have been saying for as long as I have been working with plants that our biggest problem is a tricky word, but what inhibits us from really getting into the meat of, I didn't mean to say that plants are alive and sentient and conscious beings is the perspective of the moral dilemma that it creates, because plants are such a base aspect of food and of our clothing and of our furnishing and of so many different aspects. So it makes perfect sense that the moral arguments are the most difficult. Legal standing is difficult from the perspective of not just all of the moral pieces, but also of the who really stands up and who is responsible, because we have a legal system that involves humans and things like that. But and that's already being talked about. But the moral considerations and what does rights mean, and from a moral perspective, ooh man, that is a difficult topic that we have yet to really get into. So we also, because we do not understand the relationship that plants have with humans, or the plants have with other plants and other beings from the perspective of emotions and feelings. We feel pretty comfortable that we can understand it in animals, and especially in certain kinds of animals, because of that behavioral similarity and because of the way that we use our senses. So we can sort of intuit certain things based on behavior. But when we have this alien species in front of us, right? When we are looking at plants from the perspective of this completely different type of being, of course, it's going to make it much more difficult for us to recognize whether or not those emotional considerations are there. So hence why you see in a chart like this, where the arguments for uniqueness, hence moral standing and moral considerations and possibly even legal rights, just talks about things like losing up to 90% of their body without being killed, or, the whole plant signaling vocabulary that signals things like distress and cooperation through, sharing what's going on with me, with the people, yeah, the human as well as non-human and other kin people, like recruiting other animals to help me. Like I can see those behaviors, but do those behaviors translate to love and anger and loyalty and everything we see? Those two columns don't seem to line up so well. So that's part of that confusion. Not surprisingly, there are at least two dissenting branches of the field. Anxious to safeguard their work as legitimate science by avoiding anthropocentrism and animism. And that's two very different things, right? Anthropocentrism is the idea of really kind of pushing human types of characteristics, everything we were talking about, anger and love and all these things, and in the way that we feel them on other kin, where instead animism is the recognition of other kin as alive and as themselves, and having a certain amount of inherent emotional life and thinking life, even though we can't prove it necessarily from the perspective of a Western scientific mechanistic kind of approach. Conservative, read hard science, plant scientists interpret their data in very humanist ways, exactly, which is part of the problem, that preserve the animal-plant species hierarchy, rejecting the terms plant communication and plant neurobiology for plant signaling and learning for adaptation. This has been such an argument. There are so many, I've done commentary on so many different, I've analyzed a bunch of different papers on this topic, because it is such the crux of our difficulty until we can come up with a vocabulary that allows us to think of plants for what for who plants are and all of the plant capabilities. If we keep just trying to compare to animals, we're gonna keep running into this trap, which is why things like the words plant communication and plant neurobiology, which have been in use since 2006 period, right, for so long, have been changed to plant signaling and plant behavior, for example, and how even just something as simple as learning, right? I learn, which involves I learn means I take in input, so I'm aware of what's around. Then I access memory in order to compare the input of what's happening to what has happened in the past. And then I make decisions on that, and I change my decisions based on new information. That's learning. And we have been able to prove that over and over again that plants do that. But the hard scientists cannot figure out exactly what the route is from a biological perspective, and therefore keep saying, oh, no, 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 it's just adaptation, because they can't say that there is a decision-making process in the way that we think about decisions for animals, including humans. Okay. More progressive plant studies scholars read humanities, so the whole plant humanities sector, however, suggest not only that we should stop anthropomorphizing plants, i.e., not compare them to humans, but actually try instead to think like them, to phytomorphize ourselves, which is the whole point of reawakening your inner plantness, right? I need to step deeper into my inner plantness for me to better understand not just my own humanness, but also my relationship to all other species. Challenging evolutionary biology's misuse of the concept survival of the fittest, which should actually be survival of the fit. Fit. It could be lots of species, not just one. Monica Galliano concludes that even the very competitive evolutionary process of natural selection involves cooperation. Yes, 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 it does. And cooperation and competition can coexist. Because among plants, more cooperative, collective associations are indeed an ecologically common state of affairs. Thinking plant thoughts shoves us in a better way shoves us in a better way than thinking animal thoughts does, argues Kevin Huell in the Journal of Critical Animal Studies, since the ecologically correct unit of analysis is not the individual nor the dyad, but the assemblage. Yes, this is it. This is it. This is the non-woo way of stating you need to think in plantness, because plantness looks at the whole, and we are always part of a whole. I was thinking about this the other day. I was actually, believe it or not, I was just doing the dishes, and I was looking at the dishes, and I was just thinking about all of these different papers and all this work that we're doing together, all this exploration that we're doing inside of the naturally conscious community, talking about all these different aspects of your inner plantness and of plants as friends and as mentors and as models and as measures and as collaborators and partners and all these different aspects. And I was thinking about how, plants, it's a hard word to think about I when it comes to plant, right? And we've had this conversation before multiple times in, for example, this plant right here, which is no-name Dracaena, which really is one part of no-name Dracaena because you can't see, but right around over here, around there is the other part of no-name Dracaena who, decided to split into two different containers. And I had the longest conversation with both of these plants to try to understand who is no-name Dracaena. And in aspects, both are no-name Dracaena, right? They're still their kin's individuation hasn't happened just yet from the perspective. And I was thinking about this in perspective of myself, and I was realizing that the word I is really a misnomer. Like, we very rarely can use the term I as individuals. I can use I, it's always still a collective. Because even if I say I was thinking about this, I involves everything that is within me, like all the bacteria and all the different aspects of myself and microorganisms and such, as well as also everything that shaped me. So we just our thinking as humans has become so myopic and so limited, and are looking at our plant kin to help us better understand that everything is always a series of relationships. Everything is. Though not explicitly drawing on queer studies, Hull's argument uses a post-humanist methodology that compares favorably with queer methodology. As Carrie Wolf explains, post-humanism involves both content and method. One can engage in a humanist or a post-humanist practice of a discipline just because a historian or literary critic devotes attention to the topic or theme of non-human animals doesn't mean that a familiar form of humanism isn't being maintained through internal disciplinary practices that rely on a specific schema of the knowing subject and the kind of knowledge he or she can have. So even though your external disciplinarity is post-humanist, in taking seriously the existence and ethical stakes of non-human beings, in that sense, it questions anthropocentrism, your internal disciplinarianism may remain humanist to the core. That's why I keep saying, okay, I'm going to keep going, because if not, I'm going to just keep burning. Both post-humanist and queer methodologies reject the essentialist, unified Cartesian humans for a socially constructed plurality of continuously shifting identities themselves. I am so going to read that sentence again because that sentence has a lot of pieces to it. Both post-humanist and queer methodologies reject the essentialist, unified Cartesian human for a socially constructed plurality of continually shifting identities and self. I am with that because everything that I've worked with plants helps me better embody that piece. Everything is shifting, right? Plants are constantly shifting. They're shifting sexuality from the perspective of how, many our plants are. They're shifting identities based on the way that the ecosystem is developing. There's just so much. Let's see what footnote 2 says. As queer studies scholars have argued, queer perspectives may endorse but are more likely to differ from the liberal assimilationist goals of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered movement for inclusion in heteronormative institutions. Present in groups such as the radical fairies of the 1960s and queer activist groups of the 1990s, ACT UP and Queer Nation, some queers have expressed resistance to heteronormative assimilation, choosing instead to celebrate queer culture, eschew essentialists' dualism of gender and sexuality, and affirm queer diversities across race, gender, and class. These perceptions form the base for queer methodology. Okay, that makes more sense. Now we understand what queer methodology means. Where am I? Both methodologies can be seen in Hull's approach to plant studies. For example, Hull's provocatively rejects the humanist and heteronormative hegemony of mutualisms as a framework in plant studies, challenging the conceptual gesture that defines plant behaviors as communication only in mutualist dyads. If the benefits to the emitter and receiver of plant signals are not equal and not mutual, the description of the plant behavior is downgraded from communication to eavesdropping, which I don't agree with at all, right? That's why I think even lately I have been moving from the word mutualisms to symbiosis, because symbiosis can mean so many different things, right? I keep talking about relationships. Relationships is such an important aspect of what we have to learn from our interactions with plants, because the relationships are multiple. There's so many. It's not eavesdropping just because the communication isn't, I'm not talking to you maybe directly and you're talking back to me. And so we're having a one-to-one conversation. I could still be talking to you and intentionally making it so that others are listening into it. And that's not an eavesdropping, but maybe there's a commensalism happening over here, right? Where I am not getting a benefit, but you're getting a benefit from what I have to say and from how we're interacting. And over here, there's a mutualism, which is literally both of us are having benefits. So we need to expand our vocabulary and recognize that there are relationships that are missing and types of interactions that we have yet to label. And I think that while I applaud the whole discussion around queer methodologies, and I do think that it gives a better image, I do wonder also if, again, it's not another loaded term, and if we aren't just better off coining new words. And sometimes for us to have new concepts, we have to have new words. We need to rethink how we do stuff in order to not pigeonhole ourselves into like trying to squeeze words into what others have already thought about them. But that's just my own personal opinion. Um, where are we? And the third party is called the cheater. But instead, Houle suggests framing these communications not as illicit, but as actions of generosity and gift. Spontaneous, non-meritocratic, uncontainable excess, pointing to the permanent and varied roles of organic and inorganic thirds and fourths in every communication mechanism. Houle invokes Deleuze and Guattari's concept of unholy alliances to describe plant relations as a radical collectivity that transforms sociality and kinship beyond any simple sense between to a broader among. Ooh, I like that. A radical collectivity that transforms sociality and kinship beyond any simple sense of between to a broader among. This fits. This seems really aligned with the work that I'm doing, in the research that I'm doing into what are relationships, and this really feels very connected to that. Houle advocates becoming plant for the ways it opens up thinking about relations as transient alliances rather than strategies, and credits the accomplishment of identity and intimacy as a radically collective achievement. These arguments fit well with new materialism's concept of transcorporeality, as well as queer's theories in fluidity of identity, sexuality, and community. Leading eco-criticism's vegetal branch of critical plant studies, it's just these words. I love these words. I love them because they're so outside of my norm, and I love them. Leading eco-criticism's vegetal branch of critical plant studies, Catriona Sandilands, definitely a name to go and check out if you're interested in these subjects, conceives of plant studies as emerging from and companioning critical animal studies. Is it emerging from, though? Is it emerging from? I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. Her work on queer ecology has explored the ubiquitous presence of queer animals that usefully complicates heteronormative assumptions about sexuality, embodiment, and authenticity. Following models of queering animal studies, Sandilands proposes the concept of botanical queers that illuminates how plant lives offer the potential to complicate heteronormative and humanist conceptions of identity, kinship, and time. For sure, complicating these perspectives. Identity, kinship, I like that they include also time, because this is definitely another piece to it. Yes, definitely. Though Sandilands' version of critical plant studies seems to propose a sibling relation with animal studies, other approaches may be less benign. For example, Canadian science writer Elaine Dewar seems almost gleeful in speculating that the proposal that plants think will be anathema to vegans. And since chemistry professor Susan Murch has called the volatile chemical signals from wounded plants screams, Dewar warns humans should remember that the next time you rip out a carrot of the garden, you should remember that, there should be an emphasis on that, the next time you rip a carrot out of the garden. It appears it's true. I mean, I don't know if I would consider it extremes. I still think that we have to get out of we have to step farther out of the way that we think of human emotions applied to plants. Are they screams in the perspective that it is a cry for help? Yes. Okay. It is a plant's way of sending out chemicals that say, hey, something is happening to me. Is it a scream in the perspective of fear that is also induced there, and oftentimes other kinds of emotions? I don't know. I think that this is where we need more merging between, plant physiology perspectives, but also with plant communication and with a more intuitive approach that allows us to start to understand the vegetal mind in a different way. It's just again, my opinion. It appears that a specter is haunting animal studies, writes T.S. Miller, the specter of cellulose. Miller rightly criticized the humanist methodology of animal studies, arguing that it is zoocentrism and not simply anthropocentrism, the bugbear of animal studies. that defines human identity. Miller agrees with Matthew Hall's view that zoocentrism helps to maintain human notions of superiority over the plant kingdom in order that plants may be dominated. Agreed, agreed. And we are now starting to realize the anthropocentric perspective, in the sense that we are trying not to apply all kinds of different human terminology, but it's still zoocentric. We're still looking, and that's why I don't necessarily think that critical plant studies is a sibling, or let me rephrase this, could be the sibling, but it's not emerging from animal studies. It might emerge from a different parent, both of them, and that perspective gives us the whole idea of kin homes or kingdoms that then propel us forward into this conversation. But I do not see one emerging from the other. On the contrary, I think it's more useful for them to be considered two different disciplines, that then, just the same as I do think in the future we are going to have critical bacteria studies, and we're going to have critical fungi studies. I think we are going to get to these places, and we do need to get to these places. I think that the plants are the natural extension of our understanding that we as human/animals are not the center of everything, and therefore how better to understand ourselves than by the reflection of someone so different from ourselves. And that's where the plants come in. It's just my opinion. It is a crucial dualizing force responsible for depicting plants as inferior beings and as the natural base of a human-dominated hierarchy. Rejecting what earlier plant studies scholars rightly term plant blindness in Western culture, Galeano condemns our current state of vegetal disregard for plants, whose fundamental role is to ensure continuity of life on Earth. When we contemplate and confront the vegetal in the human, I'm going to slow down for this sentence, because this sentence is my study world right now. When we contemplate and confront the vegetal in the human, Miller believes, we will advance the post-humanist project of overturning hierarchies, strike at the root of humanity's instrumentalist domination of plants, and recognize kinship with plants, which will inevitably alter how we think of our own use of them. And I also believe, I would add to that, our own sense of self. It is going to change our sense of self. I have to mark that, because I want to look at that earlier. Like, I want to really get into that T.S. Miller's. Okay, I want to get into that argument because I think it's really interesting. As with animal studies, articulations of post-humanities, plant studies perspectives can be understood through their genealogies. The science studies perspectives in plant studies trace their field from electrifying discovery in 1983 through decisive debunking in 1984 and on to resurrection by 1990. Companioned by more popular science texts such as Michael Pollan's The Botany of Desire. And how does Michael Pollan become like, I mean, I guess he is a form of popular science, and I get that, but there are so many good books. By the way, if you're looking for books that are amazing, good books around plants, plant intelligence, critical plant studies, who plants are, plants as persons, plants as yada, 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 please check out the Plant Wisdom Book Club. Like, we have this amazing book club, right, where we're talking about all of these books, and there's so many good books out there. We've had a few duds, I have to admit. We have a few duds, but we've had a lot of really, really interesting books that have expanded the way we think of it. And even if you don't, when you go to that page, if you go to my website and you go to Plant Wisdom Book Club, or you just search for Plant Wisdom Book Club, you will also find there on bookshop.org, both in the UK and the United States, I have an entire list of really great books that are all connected there. So you can see all kinds of different books. If you just want to read on your own and you don't want to join the book club, please feel free to purchase a book through bookshop.org, or just to see the titles, because there's just so many good books out there. And Botany of Desire, I'm not saying is a bad book. I mean, but it's already dated. It's 2001. And Daniel Chabamet's What a Plant Knows doesn't even believe that plants are intelligent. So why are we putting that as it? Like, better for you to put Brilliant Green from Stefano Mancuso and Alessandra Viola, because at least those two books believe that plants are actually, that book, Brilliant Green, believes that plants are intelligent. So please, please. Science studies branch has gained academic attention through professional organizations such as the International Society of Plant Signaling Behavior, originally called Plant Neurobiology, the International Society of Plant Neurobiology, and they were forced to change it. Whose annual conference in summer 2013 drew scholars from over 40 countries and was discussed in the popular debut of Plant Studies. Prominent scholars such as Susan Catriona Sandilands, science writer Elaine Dewar, and Basque philosopher Michael Martyr. It's inevitable for you to have Michael Martyr and Matthew Hall's names usually make it, which amazes, what amazes me is that we don't talk enough about Paco Calvo. Why is Paco Calvo's words not here? Because Paco Calvo has been doing some amazing work on this, and he's also a philosopher, just like Michael Martyr. So why not? Why not? I mean, I like Michael Hall, I like Michael Martyr, but anyway. Each have plant studies research in press. So does Paco Calvo. Well, I guess not when they wrote this, because that book came out. Planta Sapiens came out later. With Dewar's Smarts expected in 2015 and Martyr's new Rhodope Press series on critical plant studies, philosophy, literature, and culture, which we would love these books if they didn't cost a freaking fortune. They cost a fortune. Martyr's work cost a fortune. Already producing its first volumes on plants and literature. Philosopher Michael Martyr's Plant Thinking, A Philosophy of Vegetable Life, which costs like 70 euros or something like that, or $70. I don't remember. It's a lot. Brings new materialism's concepts of agency and the post-humanities, decentering on the human to develop critical plant studies, redefinition of species as existing on a continuum that is more alike than different with shared ancestries. In articles introducing the new field of plant studies, both the purposes for plant studies research and the dominant standpoints seem overwhelmingly humanist and masculinist. Yes, they do. We've gone through so many of those papers. All of them are in the naturally conscious community, by the way. All of them are in the naturally conscious community. I've put a bunch of them on my own Facebook page, and I've slowly been loading them here onto YouTube. I just need to sit down and really go through and load them all up. I'm actually going to write myself a note to upload all of them onto YouTube so that you have them. All old commentary to YouTube. They're not all fantastic quality, but they're, it's better. YouTube. Okay. Sorry, had to put myself a note. For example, where are we? Humanists and masculinists, instrumentalizing plants for new technologies or theorizing around plants in ways that benefit humans. For example, Pollen cites a disproportionate number of male scientists. Women number only 7 out of 27 researchers cited. It's slightly changing now, but yes, it is. And gives poetic philosopher Stefano Mancuso of the University of Florence, my professor, where I did my master's under him, of course, the greatest prominence, oh my God, in his International Laboratory of Plant Neurobiology, greatest prominence in philosophical discussions about how to interpret the science of plant studies. Mancuso's a grandstand, like he loves the stage. According to Mancuso, the reason to study plant behavior is because we stand to learn valuable things and develop new technologies. Yeah, that is Mancuso. He cracks me up. I kind of miss class with him. The class with him was always interesting. Perhaps design better computers or robots or networks, harness plants for computational tasks, or send them to other planets for exploration. Masculinist perspectives in plant science lead to questions that are limited and ultimately humanist. For example, observing interplant communication through the release of volatile chemicals, ecologists Richard Carbon and Martin Heil wonder, why should one plant waste energy cluing in its competitors about a danger, and conclude that plant communication is a misnomer and should be called plant eavesdropping or even a soliloquy. Because no, there's no relationship between them, not at all. From a critical ecofeminist perspective, the plant studies genealogy as currently presented in a Euro-patrilineage that parallels the development and omissions of animal studies presented as if the field emerged only recently, it erases not only methodology and findings of Nobel Prize winner Barbara McClintock and marine biologist Rachel Carson, along with 2 centuries of work on human-plant relations explored by women gardeners, scientific illustrators, animal writers, and ecological artists. And we did do that. We went back in a previous episode of plant consciousness commentary. We went through a paper. It was awesome. It was from the 1800s. It was fascinating to see how, and of course that was dominated mainly by like women. It was really interesting. It was a paper in 1800s talking about how we have had this field of study for so long. And why is it that even now in 2024, we are still arguing about concepts that we have known already about in the 1800s. It's wild. It's so interesting to go and see. It tells us how thick-headed sometimes we can be, like how stubborn we as humans can be about not wanting to see what we don't want to see. And because we don't want to get into the moral implications and all the other discussions, I still say that that's the biggest piece. Even more significantly, plant studies genealogies largely omit indigenous non-Western perspectives. Contemporary eco-activists and writers such as Winona LaDuke, Tom Goldtooth, Gloria Anzaladuan, Chico Mendez, Ken Saro-Wiwa, Wangari Maathai, and many others whose cultures never made the Aristotelian, Aristotle, divisions of humans and the rest of life, and thus whose writings about plants, animals, and ecology have never needed material feminism's recuperative concepts of transcorporality or nature cultures to illuminate all of our relations. Those plant studies scholars who do attend to indigenous perspectives currently work in the humanities wing of plant studies, anthropology, philosophy, and gender and culture studies. It is true, right? In the hard sciences, we don't see it. A little bit you see it from the perspective of Robin Wall Kimmerer, right? Robin Wall Kimmerer has been able to bridge that gap better than many others have been able to bridge it because she brings these 2 pieces together. But she's very outnumbered. Like she's just one person. And there are so many others like her that we do not recognize. We don't recognize. I feel kind of bad myself because I obviously, as we've talked, many of these names I know, but in the indigenous studies, there's only a very small number that I know. And lately I've been listening to various podcasts and reading more papers that really get into more of not just the traditional ecological knowledge, but really the expanded philosophies that we're talking about now and the critical studies around plants and understandings that are coming from that traditional ecological knowledge and from that more indigenous wisdom. And I have to sit down and I really want to read some of these books because I feel like there's just a piece of it that I'm missing from it. There's a wholeness and a completeness that I'm missing. I have gotten some of it through Robin Wall Kimmerer's work, but I do believe that there's a whole body of literature that I just have to get myself into. As usual in environmental studies, the findings of the environmental sciences wing are crucial yet insufficient, and may in fact be operating on distorted premises, purposes, or hypotheses. They lack the contextual, philosophical, and political reflectiveness of the environmental humanities. Bringing forward feminist animal studies in dialogue with Val Plumwood's critical ecofeminist work on indigeneity and vegetarianism, Hall's philosophical botany, and the queer posthumanist feminist approaches of Hall, Galliano, and Sandilands is needed in cultivating a critical ecofeminist perspective on human, animal, plant, and ecological relations. Rethinking these relations augments our understanding of species and meat. I agree. And I think we really need to expand on this term of relations in general. We need a much broader sense of definitions. I keep saying we have these archetypes that are missing, right? These like 20 archetypes connected to relationships that are missing, and it doesn't allow us to see the relations and our understandings of species. Well, let's not even get into, I don't know if they're going to get into species. They're going to get into species and meat now. The meat one I can understand, but the species one, I don't know if they're going to be able to cover it in just this one paper. It'll be very interesting because the species discussion relating to everything that we're talking about There is just so much to get into. All right, defining species and meat. In animal studies, the key terms species and meat reference a wealth of field defining and movement building conceptual groundwork. Peter Singer's key concepts of speciesism defined as a prejudice or attitude of bias toward the interest of members of one's own species and against those of members of other species. Do you see that as the definition? Okay. Like, let me know in the chat if you think that that's the definition, because I'm super curious as to if that's how you would define speciesism. Very interesting. Has been used to build analogies to other humanist structures of oppression: racism, sexism, classism, ethnocentrism, anthropomorphism, and to persuade progressive communities of feminists, civil libertarians, labor activists, anti-racial allies, and environmentalists alike to recognize and reject mutually reinforcing forms of hierarchical and dominative thinking, or what ecofeminist philosopher Karen Warren first called the logic of domination. Ooh, there's a footnote. What's the footnote? Footnote 3. Footnote 3. Warren did not include speciesism in that logic for another decade. Understanding? The year 1990 was equally significant for feminist animal studies. The leading journal of feminist scholarship, Signs, published Josephine Donovan's essay describing more than a century of vegetarian women's activism and theory connecting a feminist ethics of care with animal defense. Oh, plants really blow that whole concept out of the water. And Carol Adams' The Sexual Politics of Meat, a feminist vegetarian critical theory, explored the ways gender dualisms linking men, meat eating, and virility in opposition to women, vegetables, and passivity. Oh, I am so not going with that one. Like, no, 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 and no. And we have tons of conversations and lots of different commentary analysis that we've done on the feminist plant, which is connected to the water lily, which is another excellent paper, excellent paper that I reviewed here and that I went through in detail. No, women, vegetables, and passivity. No. The subordination of women and non-human animals through process of objectification, fragmentation, and consumption. Adams' concepts of animals as the absent referent of meat eating and female animals as the absent referent in not only meat eating, but also dairy and egg production gave vegan feminist language to what it means to become a piece of meat. Okay, I'm trying to open my mind to this because I get where they're saying they have to go through history. Sometimes we've had this conversation so many times. You have to sometimes go through history to get out of the historical, rhetoric. We have to go through it and understand it before we can accept that there are other ways. I just sprinkled tea on me. Anyways, shortly afterwards, Ecofeminism, Women, Animals, Nature became the first volume to link feminist animal studies with ecofeminism by placing species at the center of ecofeminist praxis. And launching, I don't know why. Ooh, no, not doing that. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm just kind of giving a different view for a second. Okay. And launching, where am I? Sorry. Became the first, and launching a decade of debate among feminists and ecofeminists about the place of animals in an anti-racist, non-essentialist, and post-colonial ecofeminism. In 2014, feminist animal studies still differs from newer yet mainstream branch of animal studies and is more closely allied with critical animal studies. Okay. Whereas animal studies has tended to investigate human-animal relations from an academic perspective, both feminism and critical animal studies are movements for justice. Many critical animal studies scholar activists are also feminists. So what we're saying here, just so I understand, is that you tell me if you understand the same thing, right? Mainstream animal studies is really still stuck in the old paradigms as women are a piece of meat, men virility, and all of those aspects. And critical animal studies are more feminist point of views, movements for justice and feminism and things of this nature. Okay, I'm just going to go with it for a second. Unlike animal studies, at the heart of feminism is the centrality of praxis, the necessary linkage of intellectual, political, and activist work. Feminist methodology has challenged the male bias masquerading as objectivity in science and worked to undermine the fit of science with dominant modes of exploitation and oppression that use science to benefit elite humans, often at the expense of disenfranchised humans and experimented upon animals. Oh, the fact that yeah, so Michelle brings up the ethical use of animals and plants as food. Well, and I think that yeah, that's one question definitely to bring up. There's another question here that I don't know if I want to open this chapter. Let's see where we go with this before I open another chapter, because there is a whole other piece when we talked about the yes, yes, disenfranchised humans and experimented upon animals. We also have to recognize the experimented upon plants, in the sense of, I have been watching lately, like every time I come to an art channel on like whatever social media you want to express, so many of them are just using plants to do things, right? I get the food, like I saw an awesome dandelion lemonade recipe. I get that. But then all of the art that involves killing plants in order to create that art, there's a morality discussion coming in at some point. Let's see where we go with here. In stark contrast, feminist methodology requires that feminist research put the lives of the oppressed at the center of the research question. Okay, I'm agreeing with you. Feminist methodology requires that feminist research put the lives of the oppressed at the center of the research question and undertakes studies, gathers data, and interrogates material context with the primary aim of improving the lives and the material conditions of the oppressed. I'm okay with this, except for we don't know what the improvement means. We don't have a definition. And that's it. We don't have a definition. Michelle's touching on it perfectly here, right? From Kirby Racing Team. If you wouldn't use fur or feathers or scales, don't use flowers or leaves. We have these splits in our minds between these two things. And there is where the general, like, not just bias is coming in, but like our fundamental definitions need to go through an overhaul as well, right? If I am taking things that are on the ground, that's one thing. But if I'm cutting off leaves and branches and sometimes the entire plant for some of these art projects, how is that different from me killing an animal to wear as fur? When there's a legitimate reason also why fur is warmer than, and better for the environment than synthetic materials. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad, right, necessarily. I'm just saying we need to have these discussions. We need to question all of this right now. And I think that's really what feminist research is, and feminist and ecofeminism methodology or queer methodology is really going towards. That, I think, is where we should head in that perspective. When feminists attend to the question of the animal, we do so from a standpoint that centers on animal species, makes connections among diverse forms of oppression, and seeks to put an end to animal suffering. In other words, to benefit the subject of the research. On the surface, contemporary plant studies may share a commitment to plant well-being as well. Not in my opinion. It's more of, how does the human benefit from what we're doing with the plants? It's very rarely about the plant well-being. If not, we would literally be studying things in a completely different concept and coming to conclusions that are really about humans' experience, not the human experience, but the plant's experience in whatever context that we're doing. How do you know the plant wants to be made into art right now? That being said, I recognize that I use plant pigments and I use many aspects that come from plants. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm saying we need to be honest that we're maybe asking even the wrong questions and that we need to change the questions we're asking. Its scholarship challenges the definition of species and meat charging that animal studies scholarship across the branches of animal studies has only moved the line of moral considerability, performing a humanist moral extensionism that includes other animal species but places plants outside the bounds of moral consideration, effectively treating plants like meat. I get it now. Now I understand. In animal studies, plants are backgrounded, writes Houle, and Matthew Hall agrees, invoking Val Plumwood's theory of the master model construction of both the master identity and the logic of domination that operates through Plumwood's 5 linking postulates of other homogenization, separation, backgrounding, instrumentalism, and denied dependency. In short, animal studies may be liberating for animals, but oppressive for plants, thus perpetuating humanism. Not only are plants kin to animals, but the presence of carnivorous plants, herbivorous animals, sea anemones, algae, and fungi, which ambiguously display attributes of both plants and animals, have all begun to blur the demarcation of species, dividing plants from animals, first asserted by Charles Darwin's theory of common descent in his On the Origin of Species. This radical continuity, transcorporality, and kinship across plant and animal species gives rise to several questions. First, as feminist methodology suggests, we can ask, do plants benefit from plant studies? And I would argue that the answer is no, or at least not always. Not always. Oftentimes, the benefit is for humans, not for the plants. And second, inspired by queer feminist and post-humanist animal studies, we must ask, without creating a moral underclass, how do we make ethical food choices in light of the fact that all potential foods are sentient beings? Boom! Right there, right there, right there. I have no thing to make that, but that's, I don't want to clap in front of the microphone. That is my central question. I am going to repeat it again. How do we make ethical food choices in light of the fact that all potential foods are sentient beings? This is the essential question that we are coming to, which is the same question we will be having about how do we make ethical building materials choices when, in light of the fact that all potential food building materials are sentient beings? How do we make ethical clothing choices? Right? No to leather. Yes to plant-based. Hello, all sentient beings. How do you make ethical food choices? The criteria is not whether or not the being is alive or not. All beings are alive. Even oil is, what is it? Petrified plants, right? Coal, like there's so much of this is connected to all sentient beings, right? And finally, in what ways can a feminist methodology be used to study and improve conditions and interspecies relations among plants, humans, and animals? Humans are animals, by the way. Augmenting critical animal studies by responding to the findings and implications of plant studies scholarship. In considering these questions, these are arguments critical animal studies and ecofeminist scholars would want to endorse and others to avoid. For example, plant neurobiologist Stefano Mancuso believes that because plants are sensitive and intelligent beings, we are obliged to treat them with some degree of respect. Not some degree of respect, with respect, period. Told you, Mancuso has his moments. We need to avoid the some in that sentence, with respect, which means protecting their habitats and avoiding practices such as genetic manipulation, growing plants in monocultures, and training them in bonsai. Yes, no offense to bonsais. I did have a recent discussion with somebody who loves bonsai, and we had a very interesting discussion, and we were talking about the difference between, again, I'm gonna put a weird association, but hopefully you will follow my logic. I know many friends of mine, many people that are part of the BDSM culture, and some of them really like to be bound up, I have been part of the body modification culture for a long time, and I have seen people who do things by choice. I am okay with a bonsai tree, like that is by choice. But that means that in order for you to be a really great bonsai master, I want you to be an excellent plant communicator. Excellent. Because it's a relationship that you're forming with that plant, and the plant has to express a willingness to be part of this partnership. If not, all you're doing is torturing a poor little plant. That's my belief. That's my belief. And that's the reason why I have liberated two bonsais that people have given to me. It took years and not all of them survived because it is a very difficult process to liberate a bonsai tree. This standpoint seems consonant with feminist animal studies arguments and feminist methodology. But this standpoint does not prevent humans from eating plants since plants evolved to be eaten, Mancuso asserts, given plants' lack of irreplaceable organs and modular structure. This argument is reminiscent of parallel justifications of human predation on other species and their telos, i.e., are meant to be eaten, whether based on biology, theirs or ours, culture, or need. Reviewing the arguments for veganism, we find some of these apply also to plants. 1, they do not want to be eaten. Countless texts in animal studies confirm that animals do not want to be eaten. Their behaviors. Look, I am going to be controversial for a second. I have lived in a place for many years now that has raised cows, pigs, and many other animals, chickens, for eggs, and all these types of things. I don't think we're at a place where we have experienced the true relationship with these animals in a way to understand the answer to the question. Again, I know our behavior, we want to interpret the behavior based on what humans interpret. Maybe this is my own, maybe I'm wrong, right? I might turn up and wake up one day and have some pig in my face who proves otherwise, but that has just not been my experience. Has not been my experience in raising pigs and in being with them and in experiencing their slaughter. Like I have been there, right there. And I think this is about relationships. Their behavior speaks their desire as they run away from hunters, fight against other hunting in that perspective. This isn't okay. Fight against other predators and struggle to free themselves from zoos, leg hold traps, science experiments, and other forms of confinement. Of course, you just said it. Other forms of confinement. This isn't about relationship. There is no relationship here. Relationship is a different thing. But it appears plants do not want to be eaten either. They give off chemical signals when attacked by insects, alerting other plants and sometimes evoking predatory insects to feed on the attackers. Plants also produce toxins, altering the leaf flavor or texture, making it less palatable and less digestible to herbivores. It is true, but they do allow a certain amount of herbivory to happen. And this is the difference, right? We have not learned how to read that with animals. Plants allow a certain amount of their bodies to be eaten and then start giving off all these signals because it's about relationship. I feed you and you then in turn take care of me. There has to be a relationship that's happening here in some form. In queer theory and in feminist theory alike, a primary consideration is consent. Okay, now we're getting to the heart of it. Consent. That is, if all parties do not consent to a specific behavior or relationship, this lack of consent signals potential exploitation, oppression, or otherwise ethically dubious relations at work. Yes. 2, they do feel pain. Yes, they do. Animals suffer and feel pain and thus deserve not to suffer. Singer's utilitarian argument has powered animals' rights for decades. Animals are also clearly subjects of a life, as Tom Regan has argued. Animals feel pain, emotions, and have a sense of selfhood that affirms their intrinsic value and gives them moral rights. They are not to be used as a means to an end for others. Plant studies confirms that plants give off volatile chemical signals when attacked, suggesting plants experience vegetal versions of fear and pain. Vegetal versions of them. Agreed. Although plants lack a brain and nervous system, their documented behavior suggests a level of plant intelligence and plant communication that is presently beyond our knowledge. Lack of information does not ethically justify behavior, though it may explain behavior, and does not provide foundation for causing fear and pain without consent. Respect and gratitude. Respect and gratitude, Michelle. I completely agree with what you're writing. Respect and gratitude. 3, they have consciousness. While the consciousness of both animal species involves a sense of selfhood that is simultaneously individual, familial, species based, and relational, plant studies research suggests that plants have consciousness too. And we've gone through so many papers back and forth and back and forth. And regardless of what the human neurobiologists tell me, plants have consciousness even without a brain. Okay. Plants have consciousness too, in that they make decisions based on environmental information, communicate or signal to other plants and insects, share nutrients, nurture their offspring. Yes. Adapting to plant studies and the questions of human diet, adapting to plant studies and the questions of human diet, the four frequently invoked bases for veganism: environmental, human health, world hunger, and animal suffering. And placing these in conjunction with Dane Curtin's contextual moral vegetarianisms. What is that? Let's see what. In distinguishing uses of vegetarian and vegan in the 1990s, I quote Richard Twine's excellent explanation. During the 1990s, the term vegetarianism was mostly used instead of veganism. I would contend three reasons for this. First, I expect some North American writers used vegetarianism but meant veganism. Secondly, since the 1990s, vegetarianism has lost a lot of credibility and a consistent ethical position within the animal advocacy movement, but at that time, it was still deemed credible. Thirdly, and relatably, during the first decade of the 21st century, notably in Western countries, there has been an ethical shift towards and cultural normalization of veganism as the preferred and more consistent practice of animal advocates. So much so that an eco-feminist arguing today for ovo-lacto-vegetarianism would suffer from a credibility problem. Okay, fair. Totally fair. Where are we? Offer some clarity. So Dean Curtin's contextual moral vegetarianism offers some clarity. Curtin, yes, succinctly argues, the reasons for moral vegetarianism may differ by locale, by gender, as well as by class. As a contextual moral vegetarian, Curtin cannot refer to an absolute moral rule that prohibits meat eating under all circumstances. For the point of contextualists' ethics is that one need not treat all interests equally, as if one had no relationships to any of the party, the relationships. So Curtin can envision extreme situations of starvation or danger where killing another animal of any species, including human, will be ethical. Again, okay. Curtin also cites environmentalists who do not support a vegan or vegetarian diet as context where food ethics will be based on other considerations of relationships, both animal and ecological, both animal and plants, not just ecological, plants. He discusses cultures that pay respect to animals unavoidably killed during human agricultural practices and cultures that give human bodies back to other animals as food. I've always wanted that. I've always said that when I die, I want to be given to whomever, the fishies, to, put me in a hole where I could be by microorganisms. Like, we need to be reciprocal in nature, my life and their lives and kin's lives. Recognizing our place in the food chain. Why did that open up? Okay. Instead of using other cultures' food practices as an excuse for Western predation, Curtin emphasizes, if there is any context in which moral vegetarianism is completely compelling as an expression of an ecological ethic of care, it is for economically well-off persons in technologically advanced countries. To support this view, he cites the impact of first world agriculture and consumption practices on first world and global environments, the role animal agriculture plays in exasperating human hunger, the exploitation of female animals in the egg and dairy industries, and the fact that first world consumers have a variety of food options that do not perpetuate suffering. Our problem, see, we're confusing. I'm going to be a tree. I like that, Michelle. I'm with you on this. I think if we learned how to activate our green DNA, our plantness DNA, and start to photosynthesize, a lot of these arguments would become moot and we wouldn't have these problems. But there is the rub. The rub is that we're looking at it, we're mixing various arguments, and I'm all for holistic views, but the problem of the injustices and the way that we look at plants and the way that we, not plants, excuse me, and the inhumane, I hate that word, the unethical treatment of animals is also happening in the plant world too, right? We're treating everything badly. And therefore, of course, the food argument becomes very complex because now it looks like it's about hunger and all these different aspects. And I'm not just saying that that's not a part of the food discussion. I'm just saying that we need to look at the discussion relating to what we eat from the is not just about the it's about the quality of care for all humans, animals, plants, right? We have to look at it much more holistically. His argument has been further supported by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization's report, Livestock's Long Shadow, documenting the deleterious ecological effects of industrial animal agriculture and plant agriculture. And it's linked to climate change. These findings have been popularized and presented in documentaries such as Meet the Truth and Beef Finland and Cowspiracy. Ample evidence documents the fact that eating such animals involves eating the planet. Since the production of animals for food requires vast amounts of water, plants, soil, and other animals. We're confusing so many arguments here. It requires the exploitation of low-waged workers and horrific working conditions, which is not about the animals and the eating of animals, but is about our horrendous way of dealing with certain types of working conditions. I mean, absolutely not acceptable in any case, not when we're talking about animal husbandry, not when we're talking about plants, agriculture, none of it is acceptable. And has devastating impact on human health. I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to touch that subject because it would take another bound of research, which one day we'll get into. Ethical eating is not merely a question of eater and eaten, but a question of eater-eaten environment. And environments are simultaneously ecological, social, cultural, and economic. Curtin kindly affirms that there may be no moral destination, but rather a moral direction we can move in, making decisions about what counts as food. I call this insight kind because it resists the judgmental attitude omnivores ascribe to vegans and makes visible the fact that all food production involves some death. Let me repeat this. All food production involves some death. Monocultures of plants and animals is bad. Absolutely. This is it. All monocultures are bad. It's just bad. As Lori Gruen elaborates, we can't live and avoid killing. This is something I think has been underexplored in vegan literature. We harm others, human and non-humans, in all aspects of food production. Many are displaced when land is converted for agricultural purposes, including highly endangered animals like orangutans who are coming close to extinction as a result of the destructive practices used to produce palm oil, a ubiquitous ingredient found in a large number of prepared vegan food products. Exactly. And so many different endangered plants are also being displaced or lost because we are clear cutting for all of these supposedly food-based or plant-based products. It's not any better. Contextual moral veganism moves from first world consumers in a moral direction, but does not eliminate the deaths and consumption of some sentient others, both animal and plant, who are more kin to humans than Westerners have recognized. Yes. An important component of critical ecofeminism, contextual moral veganism, is capable of acknowledging the sentience of plants and other ecological beings. In my experience as a person who has done so many plant music concerts, I have done so many presentations on plant music, on plant intelligence, on plant consciousness, on all these different aspects. And I have to say the ones who suffer the most are the vegans. Because vegans often do not think of their plants as the plants that they're eating as sentient beings. And they do not understand the consequences of their veganism. They have put an entire animal argument on one side, which I understand, but it needs to be balanced with the plant argument and the plant discussion as well. And I think that this paper is calling that out very nicely. An important component of critical ecofeminism, contextual moral veganism, is capable of acknowledging the sentience of plants and other ecological beings, and in diverse contexts, placing humans in the food chain as both eater and eaten, pointing to context-specific moral directions that strive to produce the least suffering and greatest care for all involved. Humans, industrial, rural, agriculture, indigenous, animals, plants, ecological entities. Though ecofeminism Amount. Though ecofeminism has conceived of humans as always embedded within specific and diverse environments, developing theory and consideration of both social justice and environmental concerns, contemporary plant studies and new materialism concepts of agency and transcorporality raise more specific questions about the place of plants in environmental and dietary ethics alike. A paradigm fracturing shift is needed here, and one that acknowledges human interidentity, inextricable form, and supported by a web of relations with sentient intelligent kin across species. Val Plumwood argued for such a shift in her theory of ecological animalism, or animist materialism, or what she variously calls a critical feminist socialist ecology and critical ecological feminism. I choose the term critical ecofeminism, both to acknowledge and to advance upon the foundational work of bridging animal and plant studies, feminism and ecology, first world and indigenous perspectives that is prescient hallmark of Plumwood's thinking. It is unfortunate her work rejecting ontological veganism, the word ontological had to show up somewhere, rejecting ontological veganism misunderstands, misrepresents, and omits significant arguments for contextual moral veganism initially advanced by Curtin, and mounts a straw woman argument against the work of vegan ecofeminists Carol Adams and Marty Keel as ethnocentric universalism that places humans outside of nature and separates from the food chain. Yeah, Carol Adams and I'm not seeing eye to eye with her theory. A strong anti-racist ally committed to challenging white privilege, Plumwood misread the vegan feminism of Adams and Keel as devaluing the ethics and worldview of Indigenous Australians, whose diet, like all Indigenous groups, has developed in relationship with their immediate environment and includes a range of plants and animals, all of whom they regard as kin. In her theory of ecological animalism, Plumwood advocated a context-sensitive, semi-vegetarian position. I just think we're supposed to go to a balanced, listen to your body, enter into relationship, and from there, listen to your body. In my experience, that will guide your way. I know it seems so simplistic and I know it's hard, but that's the work. The work is for you to really get to know yourself and to open up these relations in order for you to then be able to create or choose a diet that is based on relationship and balance or flow that is very different and might have moments of lots more veganism or vegetarianism and other points of more meat eating or carnivorous nature. I know I'm simplifying it, but that's the way I see it. Plumwood advocated a context-sensitive semi-vegetarian position and opposed factory farming, but not as subsistence, need-based killing of other animals. The goal of her theory was situating human life in ecological terms and situating non-human life in ethical terms. Wow, situating us all together. Because her unfounded attack on Adams and Keel has been soundly critiqued by Richard Twine, here I will salvage those aspects of Plumwood's theory that are helpful in developing a critical ecofeminism that is responsive to agency and transcorporality across plant and animal species. As if anticipating critiques of the humanism in Ursula Heist's eco-cosmopolitanism, Plumwood argues against the biosphere person, whether vegan or omnivore, who draws on the whole planet for nutritional needs. Plumwood argues against the biosphere person who draws on the whole planet for nutritional needs defined in the context of consumer choices in the global market, and whose lifestyle is destructive and ecologically unaccountable. Instead, Plumwood develops a critical bioregionalism that makes visible the shadow places of the consumer self, those places that take our pollution and dangerous waste, exhaust their fertility, or destroy their indigenous or non-human populations in producing our food. And this is the issue. The issue is right there. That's the big problem. These most of our ways of receiving food, for most Western cultures at least, are creating pollution, dangerous waste, exhaustive fertility, or destroy the non-human populations in order to produce that food. In delightful anticipation of queering ecofeminism and plant studies, Plumwood proposes envisioning a less monogamous ideal and a more multiple relationship to place, which she phrases as an accountability requirement, involving an injunction to cherish and care for your places, but without in the process destroying or degrading any other places, where other places include human places, but also species places, urging that we try to see creativity and agency in other than human world around us. Plumwood simultaneously maintains that all embodied beings are food and more than food. Yes, I agree. And yet, no being, human or non-human, should be ontologicalized, reduced reductively as meat. Yes, cows can be meat, but cows can also be beings that we have relationships with. I have amazing relationships with the cows that live in the pasture in front of my in the prairie in front of my home. It's amazing, and you know, there's a relationship there. Although the bells drive me crazy, but I don't think they should be wearing the bells to begin with. So in these statements, Plumwood develops a contextualized ethic of human interidentity as embedded with ecological others, accepting our place in the food chain as both eater and eaten. And this, so going back to the whole ontological, where is it? Where did she say? Ontologized reductively as meat. I agree. I don't think there's some plants, like we reduce potato or carrots to just being food. And carrots and potatoes are more than food. They're amazing beings in and of themselves, who you can have amazing relationships with if you allow yourself to have these relationships. Considering ourselves as potential prey for other animals, but in the midst of our lives and after our death, is wholly consonant with Plumwood's critical ecofeminism. Agreed. Westerners are troubled by indigenous views of non-human animals, plants, and ecological beings such as rocks, water, and soil as not only sentient, but kin to humans, seen as animism. These views suggest a perspective belonging to the disciplines of anthropology and comparative religions rather than environmental science. Yet, new development in plant studies and an elemental eco-criticism recognize a similar animacy and agency in ecological others. In ecoanthropology, scholars such as Eduardo Vivieros de Castro and Eduardo Cohen describe the ecological worldview and linked self-identity of indigenous Amazonian cultures, which emphasize non-differentiation. I missed a footnote. Sorry, I know I stop in the middle of things because where is it? Accepting our place as food in the food chain, both eater and eaten. Excuse me. Let's go back to this. The new materialisms have uncovered the various ways that our own bodies are colonized by microbial life. Isn't that what I was talking about? The fact that there is no I, it's always we, and how illness, soon to be exacerbated by climate change, are a manifestation of other microbial species feeding on humans. The hegemony of humanism prevents non-indigenous humans from conceiving ourselves as prey, as food, as the duration of our lives, and only after death do some cultures offer human bodies as food for other animals. The eater and eaten phrase in the text is thus still unequal. Over the course of a lifetime, humans do far more eating than being eaten. That's true. Yeah, separating ourselves from others is how we got ourselves into this mess. Yes. Yes, that is very true. Yes, that is very true. Okay. So we're talking about the two Eduardos describe the ecological worldview and link self-identity of indigenous Amazonian cultures, which emphasize non-differentiation between humans and animals, intercommunicability, and a state of being wherein self and other interpenetrate. As Viveiros de Castro explains, cultivated plants may be conceived as blood relatives of the women who tend them. Game animals may be approached by hunters as affines. Shamans may relate to animal and plant spirits as associates or enemies. In such worldviews, human and animals are interchangeable, becoming one another as a result of death and consumption. For Westerners, such eating of one's kin seems like cannibalism, and indeed, some vegan and vegetarian activism consider eating other animal species a form of cannibalism. Let's see, footnote 7. These are private conversations. To my knowledge, no one has yet theorized the connection besides Ralph Acampora. I first noticed this association when indexing my first book, and discovering the term cannibalism cropped up enough to be indexed. At the time, the prospect seemed too far-fetched to mention. Hold on, I just want to see how far we have to go. Wow, this is a lot longer than I expected it to be. Oh, no, there we are. We're almost at the end. Oops, excuse me. We're almost at the end, 282. Okay, sorry. Where are we? Okay, here we go. Sorry, lost my place. Okay. But if plants are also sentient and kin, then all eating becomes the eating of relatives, a significant ethical conundrum for Westerns. And this is why the second module of Reconnect to the Plant Kingdom is life and death. Because our view of life and death is so reduced, so limited, so fear-based that, of course, we are going to look at all of these things and be like, nope, 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 not going to go there. But if we are going to re-enter the entire web of life, we need to open these conversations. And the personal work is not only of reawakening our own inner plantness, but of also recognizing ourselves and that life and death is not the narrow definitions that we have been using up until now. It just isn't. Horror movies reflect a deep-seated dread of becoming food for other forms of life. Why? Plumwood argues, but as eaters of others who can never ourselves be eaten in turn by them, or even conceive ourselves as in edible terms, we take, but we do not give. Exactly. We're not part of the cycle. And if we're not part of the cycle, as Michelle said, separating ourselves from all of them, right? As she says very clearly, separating ourselves from all of them is how we got into this mess to begin with. Rejecting this anti-ecological human supremacy, Plumwood argues that in a good human life, we must gain our food in such a way as to acknowledge our kinship with those whom we make our food, which does not forget the more that food that every one of us is, and which positions us reciprocally as food for others. And that's why I keep saying, if you really tend to animals and plants from the perspective of, I am taking care of you, and yet there is a relationship that is going to be food, but in the future, I can also become food from other kinds of organisms. I know this is really convoluted in the way I'm saying it, but in my mind, it's clear. There is a relationship there, and that makes this whole thing different. But this reciprocity to the ecological network or system does not reciprocate to the individual being consumed. As Ralph Acampora argues, taking Analia Villagra's work on cannibalism, consumption, and kinship in animal studies seriously, Acampora explores her position that indigenous worldviews allow for the consumption of fellow animals, not in the absence of or in spite of bonds of kinship, but rather because of them. And that's why I was saying, I think that the original arguments higher up that we talked about in this paper before around the idea that, nobody ever wants to be eaten. Yes and no. I think that there's a different relationship that form when you create that bond, that it's just a different kind of relationship. And thus Villagra argues for becoming cannibal. But as Acampora observes, Villagra's indigenous cannibalism applies to the extended kinship of other species and does not commend anthropomorphism. No, anthropophagy. Gosh, that's hard. Cannibalism of humans by humans. Whereas Villagra's use of indigenous worldviews leads her to a moral relativism in her concluding discussion of My Delicious Pet. Acampora emphasizes the fact that the indigenous worldviews Villagra discusses and have clear understanding of kinship distances. It appears there is both a moral direction and a moral destination in these contextual and relational practices of eating, living together, and sharing souls. We can honor all our relations and still move in a moral direction that reduces suffering across species and bioregions, though our lives will never reach a moral destination of universal non-harming. We can't. We can't reach universal non-harming. It is impossible. All we can do is that the harming is not necessarily harming in the way that we're defining it today. Through our relationships, we can discover ways for there to be a give and a take going in each direction. Is it always going to be 100% balance? No. That's the reason why balance in the natural world doesn't necessarily exist for long periods of time. It's about flow. It's flow states. It's moving in and out. Sometimes some are going to give more and some are going to take more. It's these two different perspectives, but those ratios are constantly changing, and that's what creates the overall balance. Beyond meats, beyond species. What shall we eat? Eating plants ensures humans consume less plants and less animals. I don't understand how we consume less plants if we consume just plants. Somebody needs to explain the math on me on that. And ensures we cause less suffering for plants, animals, and ecosystems and other humans as well. I still don't understand that. If we consume, okay. If humans can, eating plants ensures, no, I still don't get it. I get that we need to consume less, but I think that relationships cause that. In my experience, the deeper the relationship with the being, the less I will gratuitously eat, and I will just eat and waste. I will waste way less when I have a deep respect for the plant or the animal that gave their life in order for me to be able to eat. Let's see. Sorry. Where am I? It ensures we free up more land for all of life, for plants, for animals, for humans to eat and thrive. And it monkey wrenches climate change, bringing into dialogue and the critical animal studies and plant studies branches of posthumanism through a lens that recuperates the feminist lineage of these branches. Critical ecofeminism has much to offer. It argues that undoing the grasp of and hegemony of a carnist culture requires shifting from denial to attentive listening. Okay. I can agree with this. From alienation to empathy, yes. From capitalist production time to seasonal time, absolutely. From heteronormative universalism to a queer multiversalism, yes. It involves a refiguration of selfhood from rationalist individualism to material transcorporeality, releasing the internalized capitalism of a self-worth based on ceaseless production and replacing it with a selfhood attuned and interactive with the cycles of seasonal growth and decay. It offers an acceptance of our death as part of these cycles and locates our place in the food chain as both eaters and eaten, invoking a contextual moral veganism that values individual lives as well as ecosystem relations and makes food choices that move in the direction of promoting sustainability and reducing suffering for eater-eaten ecosystems. And you want to know one of the industries that seriously needs to change, but that nobody talks about if we're going to go with this? I mean, not nobody, but very few. The entire funeral business needs to change. Because if we are going to go into the eaten perspective and we are going to reinsert ourselves into the cycle of life, then of course we need to rethink the entire way that we work in post-life. Like we need to rethink the way that we're buried, the way that we're put into the ground. Right now, we have this exceptionalism and we're completely separated out from everybody. We're put into these boxes that have all these harmful chemicals, that have all these materials that don't decompose for ages. If we instead thought of ourselves as part of the cycle of life, then our body should be given back to the earth in some way. And I know that this is a difficult concept, but it's one of the many difficult conversations of giving moral consideration to plants, because we start to touch all these different aspects about our relationships with plants. So just mm, 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 mm. Okay. Where are we? Oh, yeah. Philosophers, eco anthropologists, eco critics, and other scholars of Western culture are using the tools we have inherited as ways to theorize our understanding of other beings, of non human animals, plants, minerals, and other planetary entities. But as Audre Lorde has written, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. You can't you can't create a new paradigm using the logic that created the last one. Not going to work. What's needed is a conceptual shift. Michelle, when I was talking about the funeral business changing, unless you're a murder victim, then all that preserves evidence. You can tell that you worked in law enforcement for a long time. What's needed is a conceptual shift, a rethink, as Plumwood's proposed, resituating our perspectives so that they companion the standpoints of non-Western cultures, other animals, and plants. This shift involves the practice of attentive listening advocated by feminist animal studies scholars and plant studies scholars as well. It involves learning a different language of embodiment, behavior, scent, and intraactivity as strategies for seeing creativity and agency in other than human world around us. Westerners can stand with the struggles and lives of animals, plants, and indigenous peoples. We can utilize tools from the Buddhist practices of mindfulness and the non-theistic principles of the Dharma, originating in India but freely offered across cultures. We can become plant communicators, which would help so much in this, and animal communicators too. From Plato and Descartes, Westerners have learned to treat consciousness rather than embodiment as the basis of human identity. But these elements of being are inseparable, intraactive elements of agency, interconnected with other flows of planetary life. Just as animal studies loosen the grip of humanism for Westerners, now plant studies, along with vegetal and elemental eco-criticism, offer additional tools. For example, Michael Marder's plant thinking proposes that we examine the world of plants from their own perspective, a practice of attentiveness that uncovers the meaning of plant life, made evident through the seasonal changes, growth, and cyclical character of being. To cultivate this attentive stance, Plumwood proposes a practice of decolonizing gardening, a healthful pursuit that brings gardeners into contact with collaboration with nature. If we're talking about feral gardening, right? Because if we're talking about traditional gardening, there is so much control there. There's not a lot of reciprocity. There's not a lot of reciprocity. So we also need to decolonize the definitions of gardening away from our English ancestors in some cases, for some folks, especially in certain countries, the idea of the manicured garden, that is not the one that is going to bring about collaboration. Just stating. With nature and sensitizes them to the earth, the rhythms of the seasons, growth processes, and life and death cycles of living beings. When Marder discusses the freedom of plants, he argues that plants' indifference, lack of selfhood, and lack of concern for their own self-preservation make them capable of the freedom of play. There's not as much fear. I mean, there's not enough fear. And I agree, food forests are fascinating, permaculture principles, but more than anything, the whole idea of a garden that we really are listening to the needs, where the planting is coming from these reciprocal relationships between myself and the plants, but also between plants and other animals in the area and critters in the soil and all different aspects. Thus, attentiveness to plants leads not only to plant emancipation, but our own alongside, enabling us to recognize the rich diversity of perspectives possible when consciousness and thought are understood as a creative and inventive thinking before thinking. That's the whole plantness embodiment. Plants' lack of selfhood, I don't know if it's a lack of selfhood, I think it's a lack of human definitions of selfhood. I would just be careful with our words. Echoes the Buddhist no self, a concept linked. I prefer no self to selfhood, to lack of selfhood. I do agree that I like this concept better. A concept linked to awareness and impermanence and dependent origination. The understanding that all beings and events co-arise and pass away. Plants' alleged lack of concern for self-preservation, not entirely accurate if we consider the volatile scents released when plants perceive an attack, exactly, shows up in the Buddhist concept of non-clinging, since clinging is the basis of suffering. And that's why the whole redefinition of life and death needs to happen. We need to learn how to die in order to be able to live with less attachment and with a greater sense of peace. From a Buddhist perspective, the alleged indifference of plants, like the imputed indifference of rocks and other minerals, might be better understood as equanimity, the ability to present to life without placing conditions on how life shows up. In ecofeminist theory, Karen Warren's work demonstrates how the logic of domination has been used to rationalize human dominance over plants and rocks. A dominance she refutes through a rock climbing narrative that offers a Westerner's practice of attentiveness to mineral life, leading to a recognition that ethical practice depends not only on the quality or attitude of other, but rather on the quality of relationship and attention humans bring to regard the other. I closed my eyes and began to feel the rock with my hands, the cracks and crannies, the raised lichens and mosses, the almost imperceptible nubs that might provide a resting place for my fingers and toes when I began to climb. At that moment, I was bathed in serenity. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for what the rock offered me, a chance to know myself and the rock differently, to appreciate unforeseen miracles like the tiny flowers growing in the even tinier cracks in the rock's surface, because plants are amazing, and to come to know a sense of being in relationship with the natural environment. It felt as if rock and I were in silent conversational partners in a long-time friendship. And I would add, in deep time, because all that you're absorbing through that is deep time. Amazing. Attending to animals, plants, minerals, and other planetary life depends not only on the inclusion of others, but on the quality of attention to the relations. The emergence of plant studies illuminates the vegetal considerations already present in indigenous cultures. In Buddhism and in critical ecofeminism, a Western perspective that brings together social and environmental justice, climate justice, and interspecies justice. Ecofeminism's contextual moral veganism offers a useful strategy for making decisions about ethical eating for humans, plants, and animals. Its contextual aspects is not a form of moral relativism, nor is it a universal rule. A critical ecofeminism encourages a shift in our thinking and in our being, from humanist perspective of dominance to an awareness and participation in relations of mutuality and reciprocity that restitute humans in the cycles of planetary life. Wow. That, to, hmm. How do I get out of this? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to, there we go. Interesting. Very, very, very interesting. Why can I not? Sorry, I'm just, my screen is weird. Okay. Wow. That was very, very, definitely. I'm so glad that we ended up doing this one today. So this is critical ecofeminism, interrogating meat, species, and plants. It did not go at all like I was expecting. Not what at all, which is the best kind, right? I do love a lot of these arguments. And I think it's beautiful to, as we read more of these papers, getting a much deeper and better understanding of what is meant by queer ecology and ecofeminism, this perspective of not being caught in this dualistic point of view. And in this particular paper, I really appreciated the whole concept of the Eden and the eater and this relationship that needs to evolve in order for us to really understand, to move into new forms of eating and to form into a new relationship with food from all perspectives, whether we're talking about animals or plants or anything else that we're eating. So I'm so curious as to your thoughts about this paper. What did you think about it? This is like where are you in relating to your own relationship with food in basis of relationship with plants? So I am looking forward to more of your comments as you listen to this. And of course, as always, if you want to come over to the Naturally Conscious community, that is the place where we are going to be having an amazing opportunity to have these discussions. I'm gonna, for those of you that are not in NCC, I just realized that I've never put this link up. I am still learning this platform, so you bear with me. Okay, so let's see what happens when I do this. Oh, look at that. There it is. tigreagardenia.com/ncc, super easy to get to, but I am excited. I'm sorry. I'm still learning how to do all of these types of things, like this particular platform. And I'm looking forward to having these conversations and sharing this with everyone. So this is it for this week's Plant Consciousness Commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you remember to resist the urge to hold back your emergency green brilliance. This is me, Tigre Gardenia. We will see each other next week for another fascinating paper. And again, if you have any feedback at all, please feel free to reach out to me. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you'd like me to be talking about, if there's a particular paper or study that you want me to. And always, always remember that you are more than welcome in the Naturally Conscious community, your online community ecosystem, for us to explore all facets of human-plant relations. That's it. I'm out for this week. Bye.